Hey guys, I have some time to kill, so we're gonna watch this. Yep, that's how it works. This is Coleman Hughes. He is a an intellectual. I think he's most famous for opposing reparations. He appeared before Congress to oppose them, and that's kind of been his I think his main stance as far as the public's aware. He's not a conservative. However, he is very critical of the left, as you see in the title, and he feels that they are completely wrong about racism. Coleman's a smart guy. I respect him, but yeah, let's see his arguments.
So when
Yeah.
you then wrote the piece, the high price of stale grievances, which was also in Quillette, you started with a quote from Felonious Monk that I thought was sort of worth diving into here. They tried to get me to hate white people, but someone would always come along and spoil it. There's something about that quote that strikes me as so relevant to what's going on right now, that we are not looking at people as individuals, and that every time you do, you will be pleasantly surprised because most people are not walking around in this state of hate.
Yeah. Yeah. No.
Oh my god! Like no matter how decent the guest is, Dave is such a biased interviewer that he forces them into that narrative, right? Like that's our problem, that we don't think of people individually anymore. We just say white people. I'm doing an impersonation of Michael Brooks, doing an impersonation of Dave Rubin. Rest in power, Michael Brooks. But people have been making this argument for a long time. White supremacists and casual racists have made the argument that in order to talk about racism, aren't you being racist? Aren't you looking at things through the lens of race? You know how like a firefighter and an arsonist are basically the same people because they're all about fire. Like that's what their entire world revolves around is fire. Yeah, it's a really dumb, heinous argument. White people are not under attack. White people are not under attack culturally, not literally. Certainly, there's no institution to harm or disenfranchise white people as a group. As a group, right? um, White people are not disproportionately affected by law enforcement, extrajudicial murders, and law enforcement abuse, right? Did not mean to full size it. Okay.
I think it's striking. I mean, I juxtapose that quote with another from the New York Times, from a New York Times op-ed published last year, which argued that black children should be taught to fear white children based on the history of racism in this country. And the quote was, "As against our gauzy national hopes, I will teach my boys, my black boys, to have profound doubts that friendship with white people is possible," right? So that got published in the New York Times in 2017. Sarah Jeong got hired, having written incredibly nasty tweets about white people in 2018 by the New York Times, right? It's disturbing to me that you can't really find at this point on the left, even on the mainstream left, just the simple articulation that a person's race does not matter to their moral worthiness, to their intellectual worthiness.
So that's not the argument. I understand how it could be construed that way, but that is not the argument. The argument is not that white people are inherently racist or inherently of no moral worth or value. No, that's not the argument. But as James Baldwin once said back in the 60s when he was posed with the same thought, right? Um, we do not know what's in the heart of every person, but we know the state of their institutions. James Baldwin said, I don't know what's in the heart of all the union members, right? But I know I'm not in their union. I'm not sure of what's in the heart of churchgoers and pastors, but I know that the most segregated hour in America is noon on a Sunday because churches are so historically segregated, right? The idea is that, and this is the idea, I'm not saying to agree with this, but what I think these people are saying is that you cannot afford to take the risk of trusting white culture and white institutions just by the word of white people. Like, you can't take that risk because statistically, historically, and empirically, there is a chance that that word will not match up to action and reality. That's the argument.
It is an irrelevant character. You can't find the language of appeals to colorblind humanity virtually anywhere on the left at this point. That is disturbing to me.
How shocking is it to you? Because I think people are still kind of shocked. You know, I've been banging this drum for quite some time, and I think I see people waking up to it now, and I'm like, man, how didn't you see this? You know, these last couple of years, because it's so obvious to me that we've gotten here.
Yeah, no, it is shocking. I mean, I do remember growing up, you know, in the public school system in my town. We would have Martin Luther King Day assemblies. It was a very diverse town, maybe 25-30% black and 60% white. And we would get the, you know, the I have a dream style ethic around what it means to be a human and how important or unimportant one's skin color is. And it seemed like just such a good argument to me. And it is the best argument with regard to people's, you know, the assumed, I guess, what I mean to say here is that I've been in spaces at Columbia, for example, or conversations where my being black, it was obvious to me that there was an assumption of moral worthiness or of kind of heightened moral knowledge that I would have as a black person that a white person wouldn't have. And you know, I think I'm not the first to make this analogy, of course, but the religious analogy.
All right. He said a lot. I don't agree with it. It's not like on its face wrong. It's not Dave Rubin levels of bad here. I don't agree with it. Or at least what I do agree with, I guess I don't agree with the conclusions he's drawing, right? Yes, white people, liberal white people, left-leaning white people will have that instinctual assumption about black people, minority people, really a person of any group that has and is still marginalized, that has been marginalized in the past, that is still marginalized in this country. Um, it's going to be an instinct that, that's what we have to overcome. I think that is not a. You want to meet a person really by meeting them and interacting with them and learning about them and going in with a presupposed knowledge of them and their experience. It's not a great way to conduct yourself, and it's certainly not a great way to empathize with people and to learn about new experiences. So I agree that it's not healthy, uh, but it comes with knowing about the history of this country and the state of the country right now. I'm not saying it's correct, but that's where the instinct comes from, and that's what we have to overcome. So I mean, we agree that it's something to overcome, but MLK, Martin Luther King, the co-opting of MLK for the right and the conservatives is shameful to me. Absolutely shameful, disgusting, and shocking to completely decontextualize MLK's famous words, to completely remove them from the context of who MLK really was, what he stood for. To me, it's shameful. MLK, when he said that he wants a world where people are judged by the content of their character, not by the color of their skin. I hope I said that right. He did not mean that we cannot do anything about race. He did not mean we cannot make improvements for racial divisions, racial tensions, and racial disparities. He wasn't saying that. He's saying that hopefully one day we will get there. That if we act on justice now, if we act on this call to justice, we might reach a colorblind society. But would MLK look at this society and say it is colorblind towards black people? Of course not. Guys, when MLK said those words and he got the Civil Rights Act signed, did he just retire? Did he just go home like, my work here's done? We have the bill. It says it. We're now colorblind, don't see things through the lens of color. No, he continued working passionately for several causes, not the least of which was the Voting Rights Act of 1965. There was nothing on the laws that was racist about voting laws in the South. Like there was no wording that was explicitly racist. It was racist in effect and in impact. MLK knew that. He didn't say, well, I mean, if I act on this though, then we're going to have to start talking about race again. And I just said the whole thing, we can't get into this. No, he knew that we'd still not reached a colorblind society. So please stop co-opting MLK. He was a socialist. He believed in universal basic income. He believed in universal health care. He was deemed a radical and a subversive by not only the FBI, not only white supremacists, but by middle America. He was seen as a dangerously radical figure, and that's why they killed him. So I just think y'all gotta stop with MLK. If you want to make your arguments without him, because he stood for everything you are against.
And the analogy to original sin is pretty apt, because this has a lot to do with Black history also, because the way I see it, there are kind of two ways to study history. There's the conventional way, which is you study World War I, you study the causes and consequences, read different takes on the significance, and once you've studied all you need to know, you move on to the next topic. But then there's a religious way of studying history, which is, it's not enough to know the facts. We have to go somewhere on Sunday, every single week, and talk about the same stories over and over again. So this is, it's the difference between how an atheist learns about the life of Jesus and how a Christian learns about the life of Jesus and relearns it every week for the rest of their life. In my view, how we're looking at the history of race relations in this country, the history of racism, we are more and more putting it in the religious category of history, where I can read a piece about the history of lynching in the New York Times almost once every 2 or 3 months, right? I mean, lynching is a decades-old crime at this point, and
no, there have been black people lynched this year, right? So let's stop with that. But he's making an interesting argument that the left is taking a religiously fanatical approach to talking about race in this country. Well, let's break down the analogy. Jesus died a while ago, longer ago than black people have been being lynched in this country and being killed by the police. It's ancient history, and it's not history that has direct impact and direct consequences on living people today, right? Also, what history? What is the history we're talking about? If we're chalking up racism to history, statistically, it is not. Even if our institutions weren't racist, we still clearly have racist individuals in, unfortunately, high places of power. That means that at least the remnants of racism are still here. And even with the racial disparity in wealth, even if you don't believe that the rules today are racist, racism has a direct consequence on the economic and financial well-being of black families across this country. So the analogy doesn't stand up to me at all. I think it's a bit of a disingenuous argument on Coleman's part. I get how frustrating it could be to constantly talk about race. It's exhausting to some people, I'm sure. Um, you know, it's probably more exhausting living it. And I know Coleman is black. I'm not telling him something that he doesn't know. I'm more speaking out to people who genuinely seem to not understand that we only keep talking about race because we because people keep experiencing racism. Like, we keep experiencing it. That's why we keep talking about it. If we solve the problem, you know, a great way to get people to stop talking about racism is to stop doing racist shit. That would be the most efficient way to have people stop talking about it.
I mean, Jesus Christ, obviously it was a heinous stain on this country's legacy. You know, but the number of deaths that is the highest amount quoted in the New York Times with regard to how many black people were lynched in this country is around 4,000, right? Every single year, twice that many black people die of homicide. And you just don't even hear about that in the New York Times.
So what do you make of the fact then? So this is something that
The black on black crime thing? Really? This myth that the left does not care about urban violence is on its face ridiculous. It's on its face ridiculous. We are always talking about just problems plaguing urban communities in general. That is a core belief of ours, that we need to invest in these communities. We need to save the infrastructure surrounding them, the education. We need to address gun control. For this reason, we have an epidemic of gun violence in this country. What we don't like and what we don't appreciate is when people bring up black on black crime to distract from a cop killing an unarmed black person, for example. That's what we don't like. I mean, the idea that there is no concern about gang violence in these communities on the left. I mean, have you ever seen The Wire? Like, do you think The Wire is like some conservative machine of propaganda? The Wire clearly looks at these events through a leftist lens, and it is an entire deconstruction of this community and how it's plagued with drug trafficking and gang violence. Uh, look, you don't believe that liberals care about this stuff? Talk to them about The Wire. Liberals love The Wire. They will talk to you about The Wire forever. If they see a black person at a party, I'm quoting SNL, they're going to talk about The Wire. You know, probably one of SNL's most underrated jokes is somebody, I think it was Kerry Washington, said, you know, white people complain about wiretapping a lot, which is weird because of how much they love The Wire. But yeah.
that like a Sean Hannity will talk about. He'll say that exact thing.
yeah.
And now if you say, and then people say that somehow that makes him racist because he's focusing on black crime or something like
Well, no, he's using it to try to undermine the discourse surrounding systematic racism. It's a distraction. And it shows that he is not as concerned about systematic racism, about the extrajudicial murder of black citizens by police officers. That's why people would call that racist, which it is. No, I don't want to enlarge. Oh, we're only 5 minutes in.
that. So how do we have that conversation then? Because I think partly what's happening is the outrage, you know, someone mentions it. He happens to be someone obviously on the right. I don't know what his intentions are. I don't know the guy, but he's at least talking about it. What you just said, people aren't talking about.
Yes.
But then pays a heavy price to talk about it. That then has the chill effect that it's like people.
When does he choose to talk about it? When does he choose to have that conversation? If Sean Hannity got on his show at any point and talked about gang violence, if he talked about that at any point other than right after a black person was murdered by a white police officer, he would not face the backlash from the left. He would not. I mean, it still depends on how he would talk about it. If he was like, we have a problem with gang violence in this country, bad handed impression, but if he said, we have a problem with gang violence, and what do we need to do? Well, black people need to start taking responsibility. Don't take that out of context, y'all. That's Sean Hannity that could have maybe said that. Let's be honest. We all know Sean Hannity thinks that. I mean, these people are usually like, yeah, we're just, I mean, black people just need more, I mean, black culture, we just need to stop glorifying these things and then it'll go away. If we get rid of gangsta rap, the gangsters will have nothing to rap about, so they won't gangsta no more. My God, my God.
People are like, all right, I'm not going to talk about it. So we can look at the crime statistics in Chicago every week, and you should care about these statistics, whether the people are white or black or whatever. But people are just like, I don't want to touch it because I don't want these labels.
Yeah, it is. It is decidedly. I mean, this is one of the reasons why, I don't see myself as a natural ally to Candace Owens, for example, because there's so many other things that she says that that I don't agree with, and I guess it's the Sean Hannity problem too, because if you can't criticize a Sean Hannity or a Candace Owens for all of the things that they're saying that are unjustified by the evidence, in Candace's case, it might be climate change or whatever it is. For Sean Hannity, could be other things. Then I guess you just have to be able to make these subtle distinctions. But at the end of the day, homicide is the leading cause of death for young black men, aged 15 to 34, according to the CDC. It is not the leading cause of homicide for any other race or age group. Can we talk about that? Is it the case?
Yeah, sure. It still matters how we have that conversation, right? That still matters. It matters how we contextualize it. It matters when we decide to talk about it, in what circumstances. Leftists are a natural ally in the fight against urban violence, gun violence. And in some ways, we're leading the charge. I mean, the people who, I don't want to keep going back to The Wire. That's such a stereotype, but it's such a definitive example of the media talking about these things that Coleman is saying they don't talk about. The Wire was a leftist project. It was a far left project. David Simon was so far left he criticized the Obama administration, right? Like, I think Eric Holder was a fan of The Wire, and he said something like, "Oh, I want to see another season of The Wire." And David Simon said, "Yeah, when you end the war on drugs, then we'll make another season of The Wire. How about that?" Right? So that's just one example, and it's such a cultural touchstone by this point that I think it is relevant to bring that up, right? Like, it's such a glaring example of how Coleman and Dave are obviously wrong. So yes, we can talk about it. Please, let's talk about it. Let's just not talk about that in a way that undermines the severity of systematic racism right now, of police brutality right now. Let's not trivialize the lives that have been lost to racism in this country. Can we talk about both? Is that possible? Because a leftist would also argue that gang violence is the product of systematic racism. The war on drugs is, in its foundations, racist. Even the chief architects of the war on drugs have come out publicly and admitted it was designed to target black communities. I mean, that's been obvious, but like they even said it out loud in their memoirs. Ronald Reagan and Richard Nixon were noted racists. Ronald Reagan, I mean, we heard that recording of him, right, talking to Nixon. So yeah, the people who designed the war on drugs were racist, and they designed it to be racist. Not everyone who participates in the war on drugs is inherently racist, because, you know, they're law officers, law enforcement officers. They're enforcing the laws written, and they don't understand or know the actual racist effect and the history of the war on drugs. But make no mistake about it, doesn't make the war on drugs any less racist. And obviously, urban violence is a product of the war on drugs, of our drug laws, of the way the government funneled crack cocaine into black communities. Sorry, it's just what happened. It's just facts. Don't care about your feelings, y'all. Gotta remember that. So this video is going on a little long. Go ahead and watch the rest of this video. Watch Coleman's whole interview with Dave Rubin. Again, Coleman he's certainly more articulate than the other people I've talked about so far. Certainly more articulate than Dave. Like hearing like him talk to Dave Rubin is like, wow. Like Coleman is just like taking Dave's nonsense and he's like, okay, I'm going to have to make this sound smart. Unjustified evidence, and he does that little thing with his hand, like, I read the New York Times and they're never talking about gang violence. So yeah, go and watch it yourself, y'all. I gotta go play Call of Duty. All right, see y'all.